All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining and listening in later on YouTube. Today's Zcash Arborist Call on March 20th is getting started here. On today's agenda, we have core stack updates from ECC, Zcash Foundation, Zingo Labs, some research and implementation updates from Shielded Labs and Electric Coin Company regarding Crosslink, Shielded Labs on the NSM. I don't think we'll have anybody from Ketit here, but if we do, we'll hear from Ketit on ZSAs and the Zcash Foundation regarding Frost. We'll have an open announcements section and an open discussion section at the end as well. What are Arborist calls? They are bi-weekly calls where Zcash protocol contributors convene to discuss upgrade timelines and process, protocol research and development efforts, design and implementation of new protocol features, and identify blockers and unresolved issues. The purpose of these calls is to make core Zcash development accessible for a wider set of participants and provide more transparency for the community at large. Anyone interested in learning about the Zcash protocol development can register at zcasharborist.org. And if you want to suggest a topic for discussion or present an in-depth agenda item relevant to the Zcash protocol, please email arboristcall@zfnd.org to request a slot. Other ways you can get involved in Zcash outside of joining these calls is to check out the Zcash Community Grants website, jump in the Zcash R&D Discord, and hop in the Zcash Community Forum. You can find all these links by heading over to zcasharborist.org. Some housekeeping. I actually don't know where these items stand. I'm not sure if anybody does on the call, but we can circle back to this later if somebody wants to fill us in. And we'll get rolling with core stack updates, starting with the Electric Coin Company. And I actually don't see anybody here. So let me just double check. Yeah. Okay. We'll circle back if somebody hops in. Next up, Zcash Foundation, talking about Zebra. And again, I believe we do not have anybody to talk on this topic at the moment. So same thing, we'll circle back if anybody jumps in. Zingo Labs, let's check the screen here. We got anybody from Zingo Labs? I don't know. I do not see anybody. Okay, same thing. We'll circle back if we need to. Research and implementation updates, Shielded Labs and ECC regarding Crosslink.
Yeah, we have an update.
Great.
So, yeah, so we've completed the first milestone we set out on our roadmap. We had a blog post just a short while ago. This milestone is like laying the groundwork, basically. So we've modified Zebra and then also Zano and Zcash DevTool to all work together. And then we've begun making new RPC interfaces related to finality. So the main sort of result is we made a little demo that shows using a light client to do something that's like a reg test mode kind of operation where it can instruct the Zebra node to just change arbitrarily its concept of finality to different specific block hashes. So that's getting the ball rolling. We understand how to modify all those components, and we also have been doing this sort of a vertical slice approach to our milestones, where we try to deliver something for every piece of the stack that we want to deliver in the end. So that includes some documentation updates, placeholder for a zip, and many things like this. Another piece I wanted to call out is we've also been keen to figure out how to do upstream collaboration and send stuff upstream. And so one thing we've worked on is taking the NSM zips, which, or sorry, not the zips, the PRs against Zebra are largely, they largely consisted of creating the new transaction format, and then the actual um, like zip, I think 233 that adds the new field to the transaction is relatively modest compared to all of the code changes that just make the transaction format. So we thought we would split that up into two PRs, and one just makes the transaction format change. And so this is just our way of like getting getting involved in submitting stuff to upstream, and also sort of trying to coordinate people around how to roll out new transaction formats in the future earlier, because we'll definitely need a new transaction format for some of the crosslink stuff down the road. All right, uh, so next, our goal is milestone 2. So that's something we call, or it has something, yeah, we call that disconnected BFT. So this first milestone doesn't do anything with proof of stake or BFT. It just adds like an RPC pathway from clients to Zebra. The goal for the next milestone is to integrate this SDK called Malachite, which is a Rust implementation of Tendermint. So we want to integrate that into Zebra, but we're doing it in such a way that we don't modify any of the proof of work consensus. So nothing changes about the blocks or the transactions. Instead, we have like this new BFT component glued on, and it will be speaking to the other BFT components of nodes in a network to come to consensus about what the order of the proof of work blocks is. And one thing we want to get out of that milestone is something we call mainnet shadowing mode. So the idea here is we thought it would be fun if we could allow users, anyone who's interested, to run this milestone 2 prototype and connect it to the real mainnet. And so what this would be doing is everyone who's participating would be connected in a BFT network that's sort of like a test. It's just a test net. It doesn't interact with mainnet at all, except it's sort of reading from mainnet, so it's read only. And it's just a way to sort of exercise having the two protocols running simultaneously. And so that's the goal for the next road milestone, and our target date for that is June 1st. And then let's see, the final piece is we're noticing all kinds of ways that we want to collaborate across organizations. So I mentioned like the transaction format thing. Another thing we've run into is when trying to, I mean, just generally, when trying to figure out the software architecture decisions, we want to be collaborating with a lot of teams, especially the Zebra team. But we also modified Zano to make our current milestone work, and the Zcash dev wallet tool and Libres Zcash. So all of those pieces, we want to figure out like the architectural approach we want to take, such as what kind of RPC connections do we want to be adding to these components, and then make sure that those work with the other upstream projects. So it's sort of we have a need to like coordinate across all these teams on our roadmap early, so that what we build works for all those components. And then another thing we're getting started on is we have a list of vendors and dev teams who we consider stakeholders. And so we're going to start more actively reaching out to them. And the idea there is we want to get early feedback from them on our milestones and say, hey, this is what we're building. Is it useful to you? Do you prefer it would be different in some way, or things of that nature, so that as the prototype sort of matures, we know we're sort of heading in a direction that all of those vendors and other projects are aware of and hopefully can integrate down the road. Let's see. Any other questions or thoughts about this? Yeah, I would also direct people generally, if you go to shieldedlabs.net and look at our blog, you can find our roadmap blog posts. And so we're still, we are concluding the first milestone, moving on to the second. So if you're curious what's next, you can go review that.
Great. Thank you, Nate.
Yep.
I guess I'll do one more call for any other follow-ups on Crosslink or questions for Nate or anybody from Shielded Labs. All right, I see Chris joined, so I'm going to go back to the ECC updates real quick. Chris?
Yep. Howdy. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, so the main effort over the last couple of weeks, apart from Zcon stuff, we have so we've been integrating, so Strat has been integrating Zyno with Zale, and we now have syncing, essentially working in Zale using Zyno, as using Zyno as a library. So that's a good step forward in the process. We've discovered a bunch of bits and pieces that we're going to need going forward. And so I think Strat is in the process of making issues for those on the Zano team's repository. The other thing that's been on our plate has been we're releasing new crate releases for Zcash keys, Zcash client backend, and Zcash client SQLite, and new releases of the ECC wallet SDKs. These add essentially transparent gap limit handling. So the way that Bitcoin wallets handle, or Bitcoin derived wallets handle address rotation, means that, or for transparent addresses, means that in recovery you need to do this process of searching for addresses that might hold funds. That's now in place, so that's going to be in the next release of Zashi this coming week. We've also added some functionality to Zcash client SQLite to fix a bug where you could have potential corruption of note commitment trees, and so that's also going to go out in this release, and there will be yeah, those crates are going out in the next couple of days. Apart from that, we've been doing some zip specification work on sort of future community governance models that Josh is going to present in the next few days. That's, I think, it.
Cool. Thank you, Chris. I see Strad joined as well. Anything else, Strad, or any questions for Strad or Chris?
I think Chris covered everything I can think of.
Cool. Thank you, guys. I still don't see anyone from ZEF or Zebra or Zingo. We did Crosslink, and back to Shielded Labs on the NSM.
Yeah, so in the last Arborist call on February 20th, I provided an update on the integration work that we're doing. So for ZIP 233, we had removed feature flags and added NU7 along with the V6 transaction format. For ZIPs 234 and 235, we developed separate feature flags for each. We also removed feature flags from Libra Zcash, updated the test vectors for V6 transactions, and at that time had rebased all PRs on the latest upstream, except for Libra Zcash, which still remains on the December 2024 version. Since then, like the past month, we haven't been able to make further progress. We are waiting on a few PRs to be merged. One is 9300, which updates Zebra dependencies to use the latest Libra Zcash. and this will allow us to rebase the Libra Zcash PR to the main branch. And then additionally, Aria indicated or asked us that reviewing the ZIP 233 implementation would be on hold until after 9256 is merged. And that's a PR that introduces NU7 constraints in a way that aligns with the ZSA work. So what we're wondering today is if we can get an update on when these PRs are expected to be merged. I know it doesn't sound like anybody from ZF is on the call, but I wonder if maybe Strat or Chris might be able to answer that.
So we have not had time in the last couple of weeks to look at these, but we can prioritize that.
Okay, great, thank you.
Anything else on the NSM? Or
Yeah,
questions for Jason?
And
Yeah.
just as a note, if there are things like that where, you know, it's totally fine to keep reminding us that that we need to look at things, and you know, ping us in Discord or on Signal or wherever and be like, hey, you know, friendly reminder, because yeah, stuff gets lost easily along everything else that we're doing.
Okay, yeah, I think Mariusz has done that. He just hasn't been like overly aggressive about it. So the last update was probably like a couple weeks ago. So we'll be more diligent about that.
Cool, thank you, Jason. I do not see anyone from Kedit. Does anybody want to bring anything up about ZSAs? All right, we will jump to the next one. Same things. Nobody from the Frost team. And now to open announcements, if anybody has one of those.
I'll just call out that today is Jason's last day as a community note taker. He's been doing this for 2 years. He's done an awesome job. So thank you, Jason. And ZCG is actively looking for his replacement. We have a few strong candidates that we expect to have somebody in place by the next Arborist call on March 3rd. And if a replacement isn't confirmed by then ArtCore is going to step in temporarily until we bring on somebody permanently.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I second that. Squirrel, you did an amazing job.
Definitely.
Cheers. It's not over yet, but I'll try.
Any other open announcements?
Can I just give a little more love to Squirrel, because when I took a break from work, my only connection really to Zcash was just catching up on the notes threads, and I really liked having that resource. It was like, yeah, a great thing to follow. So I really appreciate it.
Cool. Let's see. I saw Aria. Let's circle back. Aria, are you available to give an update on Zebra? Okay, we'll head back the other direction for now. Open discussion. Jason, you reached out about 2 things. Would you like to jump into those?
Yeah, so the first thing's for ZCG. So I don't think Renee's on this call, but he's a developer for Zenith, which is a full node Zebra wallet. And he recently submitted a grant proposal to add support for Frost and also an integration with Keystone. And we wanted to hear from the core development teams on this call whether they are using or plan to use Zenith, or if you know anybody who is using it. Basically, what we're trying to determine is that given that we have limited funding, does it make sense to fund these integration now? You know, do they provide meaningful value to the ecosystem? Who's using it?
Renee did jump in here as well, if anybody has any questions.
Oh, I think he had some additional questions too, yeah.
Yeah, Renee, if you want to speak, feel free.
Or even yeah.
The feedback that I was hoping to get, although I don't think we have anybody from ZF right now, is based on our proposed approach to perform the frost multi-sig ceremonies would allow us to do it without a server. It would be decentralized. And it is end-to-end encrypted, it is peer-to-peer, and it is routed through Tor. So it does seem to match all the criteria specified on the Frost book for broadcast channel and the communication channels, but we definitely wanted to hear what the Frost team thinks about that idea.
Yeah, it looks like still nobody from the Frost side. Does anybody have a response to what Renee brought up, or yeah, Nate?
I don't have a like super specific opinion, and I'm not too familiar with all of the needs, but what you just described sounds cool to me. So I was gonna see if I could maybe be like a alpha tester or beta tester. Like, will the Frost support be like open source that I can try out before it's ready?
Yeah, all our code is on our repo. Right
Okay.
now, we've already wrapped this communication protocol. It's called the protocol is called Kuch, I believe that's how you pronounce it. It's a Welsh word, and I don't know if anybody can pronounce Welsh.
Right, right.
And the protocol already exists. People can try it on their phones. It's right now it's used for chat, but it given its properties, we can use it to have two of our wallets talk to each other and pass each other information through that protocol. And that's what we're trying to implement. We already have ported it to Haskell. So our plan is to embed one of these Kuch nodes into each of our wallets so they can pass that information to each other, especially for the ceremonies in which we need to pass around the intermediary steps for key generation and for signatures. It gives us that opportunity to do it in a decentralized way. It's encrypted, and it also has the basically that part that would be missing to do it all on chain, which is validating that it's coming from the person that it says it's coming from, because it does two-way authentication. So it seems to be a really good fit for the application, and that's kind of what we wanted to get from the Frost team to see if they agree.
Cool. Thank you, Renee. Any other thoughts? I haven't been checking the chat here. Let's see. Dodger mentioned to you, Renee, I believe, to post some details on the forum and tag Conrado.
Yep, I can definitely do that.
Cool. Bunch of love for Squirrel. Okay. Cool. Any other topics for open discussion?
Yeah, I had one more, but I noticed that a lot of people are missing from today's call. So what I'll likely do is just talk about it. It's related to the zip process, so I think it's pertinent to Chris and Strad. And then what I can do is just sort of follow up with a forum post or something. But anyways, recently I've been thinking a lot about the zip process and how we can improve it. So the NSM zips that we did a year or so ago took significantly longer than expected. And I wanted to make sure that we don't run into similar issues for the crosslink zips that are coming up. So I'm hoping we can make the zip process more efficient. So to help with this, like one thing that I've done is I've asked the 3 engineers that we recently hired at Shielded Labs to attend the zip meetings with the goal of eventually becoming zip editors. And with more zip editors, I think the workload could be divided into 2 or more groups, which would allow for faster and more manageable reviews. that should make the process more efficient. But I've also noticed some other issues with the zip process. So zip 0 outlines the required sections of a zip. And one of those sections is called security and privacy considerations. However, out of the 10 zips being considered for inclusion in NU7, only 2 include this section. Furthermore, like zip 0 does not clearly define who is responsible for assessing security and privacy implications of a proposed feature or upgrade. It states in one section, it is not the primary responsibility of the zip editors to review proposals for security, correctness, or implementability. But then in another section, it notes that zip editors may reject a proposal if it has manifest security flaws, including being unrealistically dependent on user vigilance to avoid security weaknesses. So the question is, like, where does the responsibility lie in ensuring a thorough assessment of security and privacy issues? This is going to be relevant to cross-link zips and other zips that we do. So, you know, just to be clear, like, we didn't do a security and privacy consideration section in the 3 NSM zips that we put forward, but we did make the zips publicly available for community feedback, and at the same time that we submitted them to zip editors for review. And what this allowed was security concerns were raised, and we discussed them like as part of the process. But for some of the current zips, there doesn't appear to have been a request for public feedback or an assessment of potential security and privacy risks. And I'll give you an example. Zip 231, it allows for variable length memo fields in transactions. And like currently the memos are fixed at 512 bytes, and zip 231 removes this constraint, which could create like new attack vectors because variations in memo size leak information. And so like, I think the intentions behind this zip are good because they offer greater flexibility for application, but there's no documented analysis on the security implications. And that sort of demonstrates a significant gap in the process that could ultimately lead to an unintentional compromise of user privacy. But my point here is not to pick on zip 231. It's just another example of how the zip process has issues and it sort of needs to be reformed or rethought. You know, we discussed these issues with Taylor Hornby last week, and some potential solutions that came up were having a transparent analysis and public discussion focused on the benefits and risks of, you know, proposed features and upgrades. Zip 231, for example, my understanding is that it breaks the wallet threat model doc that Taylor put together while at ECC, but it's not clear if anybody is aware of that or is even paying attention to that document.
I will say that we actually had extensive discussions on this point in the design of Zip 231.
Who's we though?
Well,
editors?
the ECC engineers.
Okay, but does anybody know that? So that's the problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right that was not adequately documented in that zip.
Okay, and then the second point is fix the ambiguity in zip 0 and make it clear who's responsible for assessing security and privacy risks. And then the third thing is if somebody has a question or challenge about the security of a zip or any other issue with a zip, like who should they raise it to? It's unclear if it should go to the zip editors, the zip authors, or just like randomly raised to the community. There's no process in place. So I think that's something that we should fix.
Okay, I'm just going to jump in and say that you are misunderstanding the zip format instructions sections of zip 0. Each zip should have the following parts. A should is not a requirement. Should is defined in BCP 14 as a, let me go get the exact wording. RFC 2119. HTML should means that there may exist valid reasons to ignore a particular requirement. The full implications should be understood, but it is not a requirement for that section to be there.
Okay, I understand that. It does say.
Yeah.
based on my reading, it does say not applicable. But I mean, I still think more often than not, a feature or change to the protocol will have certain security implications
Yep.
that should be addressed or discussed or documented somewhere.
Indeed. And I think at least again, using zip31 as the example you give there, we give most of that rationale in the rationale section. We have various discussions about the effects of the effect of various choices made in the zip on and why those choices were made. And some of those rationales are security and privacy rationales. So the useful change that could be made here is to better distinguish security and privacy rationale from other rationale, which could be done in more general in zips. But the general reasoning of whether or not there needs to be security rationale, I agree that in general there should be, but the responsibility for that fundamentally comes down to the authors to do, because the zip editors can't force an author to write something or not write something.
That I understand, but then who's is the
I mean, it's
burden on the
totally
authors,
legitimate for
or
you
is
to.
the-
It's totally legitimate for you to be calling us out on
Yeah.
that we didn't write a security and privacy section in the zip, and we'll go fix that. Like, this is how it's supposed to work.
Yes, with my author hat on, yes, we should have put that into a section there. With my zip editor hat on, I can look at that and see that like there is rationale there that covers that. So I don't see it as a necessary change, but from a readability point of view, I agree that it would be useful, yes. And likewise for some of the, I expect that, for example, there was if we went back and looked at the long history of the ZSA zips, there were probably aspects there that led to additional security and privacy rationale that came up through the various rounds of review that went on that.
Yeah, there were the 2 ZSA zips actually did have that section in there, but the other 8 did not. These are the NU7 candidates. There were 10 of them.
Nate?
Oh yeah, I was thinking that part of zip 0 that says should, I mean, I would kind of prefer a different thing, which is that it must have a section. And then if it doesn't seem applicable, there's just like a sentence or two that's like, security and privacy issues don't matter for this zip because X. Well, yeah, the main thing that seems important to do is to make it clear the distinction between that hasn't been covered yet versus that was covered but deemed unimportant, or something like that.
Yeah, I think it is definitely useful to memorialize discussions that were had, because that can be very useful for subsequent security analysis. But as long as they are memorialized somewhere, I'm personally not too worried about whether it is in a explicit security and privacy consideration section or rationale section. It can to some extent depend on the flow of the zip, in terms of what ends up being easier to explain to the reader. And readability is an important aspect of zips.
Yeah, let me change the question a little bit by using a different example. Like, when is it that the security analysis should occur? And if you take like zip 234, which is for the NSM, and it's the one that smooths out the issuance curve, like, is that something that would be done during the initial zip submission, or is it done during the implementation, or is it done both? That's for a Stratter.
For something that for something that has consensus level mechanism impacts, there's a the existing deployment process for network upgrades has essentially requires these things to be done by by selection of the mainnet activation height, because otherwise we're deploying something that we aren't necessarily convinced is secure or or works within that cooperation with the rest of the changes going in. So normatively it has to be done by then. In practice, you would want it to be done ahead of any spec audits going on, because the spec audits would then take into account the rationales provided. Given that this, so this is one of those, it has to happen at some point, and generally either before or early on in the implementation is probably generally when that's going to happen, except in my idealized form where the implementation is happening sort of in a cycle, in a small loop, so that we're able to improve the specs based on the implementations. But like, if you think of the final production implementation that we want to go into production, I would hope that by the time we get to that point, that that we've already been through, that the spec is pretty well fleshed out at that point, including whatever rationales that need to be had, security or otherwise.
Nate?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is, again, just brainstorm, but it feels like, to me, it feels like we would want something about security and privacy rationale, at least, before sort of the community zip selection process, which my impression of what that process is that it's somewhat murky. So like, yeah, and I'm assuming that that process should happen relatively early in the implementation process, just to avoid, um, you know, teams spending a lot of effort or money building something out that isn't accepted by the community. So, but I guess this is always a problem with this sort of process, because like early on, it may be hard to decide because there's not enough specificity, or like people aren't sure what the final form looks like. But also late in the process, it's unfortunate to be like, oh, well, teams spent a couple years building this thing, but actually the community rejects it. So I'm wondering, I feel like part of what could be helpful, everything I thought you said, Strad, made sense in terms of, if we know what we're building and going to ship, then the process or the ordering should line up that way. I'm just wondering if we can push even more before like a community decision point, or if we can clarify how the community decision process looks like. Which,
I mean, that's a separate kettle of worms there.
It is.
But the I mean,
it's a kettle of worms, but a lot of practical stuff hangs off of it, right?
Yeah.
So.
I mean, as another example, we had there's a change that was going through for ZSAs that Kit had proposed for a change to how action groups interacted with ZSA burns, and a move into that. And it was just proposed as a change to the transaction format, necessary for subsequent usage in proposed usage in atomic swaps. And when the zip editors sat down to work through it, we worked out that there were privacy implications of this change. And so we actually ended up having a long discussion there to figure out, okay, what are the implications of this? What is the trade-offs that we're getting based on the extra functionality and whatever? And eventually came to the conclusion that, like, okay, there is a privacy trade-off with this, but we're comfortable enough with the understanding of the implications there that we're okay with the proposal that Kedit's made to make that change, as well as we proposed a way that this privacy thing could be potentially fixed. Although, given that this was proposed so late in the process, it's basically not practical to do. And so instead, there's a proposal for what issuers can do outside of the protocol to address this privacy limitation of the change. So these kinds of changes will happen all throughout the process, and any feedback, any change on a spec is going to potentially impact the rationale, in general, and the security and privacy rationale in specifics. So trying to say it is definitely going to be done by a certain point is going to be regularly adjusted as the real process hits the road. So we need flexibility in there at some points.
I'm almost wondering, I mean, to me, this sounds like a kind of process where we need smaller incremental iterations. But I don't know how, because it could be the case that, like, in terms of governance and what the community wants, they do want feature X, and then, 6 months into its implementation, everyone learns that it requires certain trade-offs or has certain implications that nobody was aware of earlier. So, like, there can be multiple decision points, even from a governance standpoint, not just a engineering making stuff work safely standpoint. So I'm wondering if we want to seek out something that's more iterative or what. I don't know. I'm just talking off the top of my head. I see Zuko's hand.
Yeah, Zuko.
Can you give me a further pointer, Strad, into the documentation of this privacy trade-off and issuer workarounds? Which zip is it?
That specific one was 226. There's a zips. Let me go pull up the PR.
Yeah, I have 226 open.
There's a bunch of discussion in the history.
Yeah,
I'll look into the history.
No, we haven't merged the change yet, but the PR was open separately to discuss the change there. It's PR 991.
Okay, so it's PR 991 in the Zcash zips repo?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Any other? Yeah, Nate, go ahead.
Well, I feel like we've brought up a topic so there's the topic of improving the zip process or making it clearer, but then it runs into the can of worms of how we decide what should go into upgrades. And it feels like easiest for us to improve the zip process without dealing with the can of worms, but I feel like that can get us only so far. And so sooner or later, it behooves us as a community to figure out the can of worms, or the next iteration of worms v2. And I'm just not sure how to get that process started, or who should be responsible for moving it along, or anything like that.
Well, as far as a change to zip 0 goes, the process for a change there is like any other zip. If someone has a proposal for a change, making a PR with a proposed diff on zip 0, or now that we have, which I'll have to have a think with the other zip editors as to whether it would make sense as a 2000 series zip. For now, the easiest thing is just make a proposed diff on zip 0 with a change, so that we can be discussing a concrete proposed change, and then that makes it very easy to then go, okay, what are trade-offs with the changes there. So, for instance, the one discussed earlier about, currently it is not required for there to be a security section. Maybe it should be. So if that's the proposal that we require that section, that's a great PR for someone to put up that we can concretely discuss.
Yeah, that one's nice and specific.
Yeah,
I can propose a few changes that I mentioned today, and have them ready for the discussion at the next Arborist call.
Yeah, that kind of thing would be very useful to in general, being able to comment on a proposal ahead of. I'm going to be able to give better feedback on a proposal I've had a chance to see ahead of time. Put it that way.
Yeah. Do you assume that, like, what do you think? What percentage of the community do you think actually reads these zips? Like, we vote on these in polls, or we were going to vote on NU7 candidates in a poll, and it's not clear what the status of that poll is. I'm sure we'll find out in the next couple of weeks. But, like, do you really think that the majority of respondents are taking the time to read and understand these zips? I would think no. And if that's the case, then do we need to do a better job of communicating, like, executives' summaries and trade-offs that are being made, assumptions that are being made to the community for them to review as sort of like a more digestible way to make a informed decision?
Oh, absolutely. The process of writing zips is very hard because it's trying to serve multiple different users. Because it has to be correct as a specification. It has to be sound and implementable and unambiguous. And those words are in tension with comprehensible and understandable by someone who isn't the person implementing it. Generally, the way that most zips have tried to thread that needle is the motivation section has generally been what we've tried to make the most approachable. And then depending on the zip proposal, some of them, there's been a fair bit of wordsmithing. So on the specifications themselves. So for example, the funding stream zips for what was it? 10 what became 1015. We had a bunch of drafts prior to that, but also the series 1001 through 1012. There was a lot of work put in by the zip editors on zips were being proposed by the community, and ostensibly under the zip process, it's on the community to make their case and to write those zips in a way that people can parse and understand. But we put in a lot of effort to craft and shape those zips to put their best foot forward, so that the community had a chance of understanding them. But even with that, it's still a wall of text, and a wall of text is a lot for people to read.
Zuko?
So today, if I go to zip 226, I can see the privacy and security rationale, and I can see updates to it and so forth. So I know that someone has analyzed this aspect of it. Today for zip 231, there's no evidence that anyone has analyzed that aspect of it, although I totally believe what Chris says, that some people have in great detail, but they just didn't write it down. But there could be other zips. If I go to the 10 zips and Jason says 8 of them don't have security and privacy sections, I honestly don't know if anybody has looked at the risks or privacy issues of any of the other 8. I don't know my point. My point is, and zip 0 says zip editors might do that, but they might not. So it also doesn't help me. And I'm not saying zip editor should, but I'm saying I don't know. How can I tell if anyone has?
Well, if it's not the zip editors, who is it? Like, do we
Yeah.
want some sort of independent security assessment done? Like, should that be a requirement? So
Well,
that was
it's the
another thing that I
responsible.
wanted to, that's another thing that I wanted to clarify in the zip.
I think that it's the responsibility of the zip editors to to make sure that if security and privacy considerations apply to a zip, that they're discussed. And I again, I agree that zip 231 and the rest of these probably should have security and privacy sections. I mean, so yeah, let's do it. That's a great suggestion. What and in terms of who is responsible for so the zip editors can be responsible for ensuring that that analysis section is present and uh, does all of the other things that we as zip editors do, is legible, and if there are questions that we raise them and so forth. It's ultimately up to the zip authors to have performed that analysis, or have had that analysis performed on their behalf. And then in terms of integration into the protocol, I mean, that's a whole that's essentially the whole governance discussion that, to be quite frank about it, has been relatively informal before now because so few entities were involved in the process. So yeah, it is time where we need a governance process, so that when we're voting on things that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed.
All right. Thank you all for that. Any other thoughts or questions on that topic?
So one takeaway is we could maybe make a PR against Sub-Zero, but I feel like there's another takeaway, whereas we all kind of want more clarity about the governance process, but I don't know what the takeaway is yet, except we've documented that.
Let me interrupt, because you said we all want, and I don't want that, whatever it was you're talking about. I'm just trying to hold on. Am I still there? Anyway,
Well,
I don't really see the connection. Like, I'm not concerned about governance. I just want to be able to track down, based on publicly visible documentation, which things have been analyzed for security and privacy.
But if you switch out your hat and now you're a zip author, don't you want to know, like, what do I need to do to get this into the protocol? Like that, there's no succinct, clear answer for
I
that.
just think it's really useful to separate decision making from information gathering. Like, there's lots of ways that we could improve governance that would worsen governance, but the only problem with producing the information is it takes time. But other than that, it's always good to have the analysis if we can afford it. Anyway, never mind. You just said we all agree on something, and that was a mistake. I'm going to mute my mic again.
Yeah, I take it back.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think or Strag.
I was
Go
going
ahead.
to say the other thing that I wanted to note there is that in terms of the like the checks and when things happen, like the presence or not of knowing whether someone has looked at it from a security privacy perspective, well, a spec audit potentially covers that depending on the scope. So that also comes down to whoever is sorting out general spec audits of the changes going into a network upgrade overall versus for more complex subcomponents, specific audits of those subcomponents on their own. In past network upgrades, we've generally had sort of overall audits that have been done for either the full set of like smaller changes that are being made or the large protocol item, naming no names, but sapling and orchard, the behemoth that they were. And those were coordinated at a time where it was easier to corral the relevant people into a meet to make progress on those things. It's harder to do that now. And so to some extent needing to shard those pieces out and decentralize the responsibilities for working on those pieces is sort of like an inevitable side effect of the lovely goal of having more people involved.
All right, I'm seeing head nods and thumbs up. I'll just read something Renee posted so that it's in the recording. I think that this is in response to something Jason said. I think that if there will be executive summaries of zips, it would be useful to add a section of impacted stakeholders. For example, quote, all wallets need to make changes. Yeah, so since Nate brought up takeaway, like one thing I took away and agree with that Jason said is a large amount of the community definitely are not digging into these zips in detail, and executive summaries would be useful.
I mean,
Yeah.
all zips are required to have an abstract, which is intended to be exactly that.
Okay. Okay, yeah. Do they all? Or I mean the 10 for NU7?
I mean,
Those definitely do.
they definitely have abstracts, but the abstracts don't really give that much information. They don't talk about who impacted stakeholders are. They don't talk about, what security considerations were assessed and so on and so forth. It's really just sort of like a summary. I saw something in here worth noting that some of the motivation sections should be up for best work of fiction awards. And I think that's kind of, I don't know, like I feel like our zips try to be as straightforward as possible. I feel like the motivation sections are sometimes like, try to serve as the executive summary. But again, they're just like, they don't cover everything that people need to assess to make an informed decision.
That says to me that we need to improve the abstracts. I don't think that it says that we need a separate like executive summary type,
Sure.
or yet another thing, basically.
Yeah, there's no reason why the abstract can't be the executive summary.
Yeah, and also, sorry, Shai, go ahead.
And the other thing to note here is that the skills involved in writing a spec and the skills involved in writing an executive summary or an abstract that correctly and succinctly conveys it are not necessarily overlapping skill sets.
Right. So to that point, like, shouldn't that be a role of a zip editor to state things in a clear and concise manner? Because some people may not be like fluent in English, for example, and not making technical points clearly. So that could be one drawback.
Well, that is
even
to
lots
some
of people
extent
who are fluent in English that don't make technical points clearly and
100%,
succinctly.
exactly.
Yeah, and to some extent, that has been implicitly a role that the zip editors have taken on. As I mentioned before, there's been plenty. The zip editing, a large part of that is editing for clarity, editing for both identifying semantic weaknesses, because like defining the semantics is at the end of the day up to the zip authors. But the zip editors are free to make whatever changes are necessary for clarity purposes. And often that has been making changes with abstracts, but there's so much to do. So having more people involved in that process and willing to contribute is absolutely going to help here.
Okay, well, I think you're going to like Andrew, Sam, and Mark. They're super smart. They're eager to be involved in the process, and we're happy to have them as part of the Zcash ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm pretty good at explaining technical things in layman's terms, so maybe I can pitch in there. I'll volunteer myself to for that role if that's needed.
Awesome.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, if you see improvements that can be made to the abstracts, for example, if that's a place to start, then by all means, make PRs or make suggestions on PRs or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Very
The
good.
only thing you should need to do is alter the markdown or RST file of the zip itself. Assuming the CI system works, which it doesn't currently, but we're doing some manual things over the top of it, so don't worry about that. The system should do all the renderings for you. And currently the system involves some zip editors who have to periodically rerun the system. But that's you don't have to worry about that side.
Okay. Well, I'll take a look. Thank you.
All right. Any closing thoughts on this topic? All right. I don't see any hands. Let me jump to my other screen here. Okay. Thank you all for joining. This was a great discussion. This will make its way to the ZF YouTube. And the next Arborist call is the 3rd of April at 1500 UTC. Beware of daylight savings time. All right. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thanks, Dan.
Mm-hmm.